famous TikToker. He's also on YouTube. Parker Get a Job. Most recently came across him because I was watching a Jubilee video of, I believe it was Charlie Kirk debates 21 liberal college students, which was a very interesting video. I actually highly suggest that you watch it. But Parker was one of the guests that was on debating Charlie Kirk, and out of all the people there, he just stuck out to me as someone who just is a well-versed person. But you can tell he's a very skilled debater. The one thing I will say, I don't think he was given Charlie ample enough time to answer stuff. It seemed like he was trying to just win rather than actually have a fruitful discussion. I could be completely wrong. That was just my observation. Anyway, I'm not here to talk necessarily about Parker specifically, but I was watching some of his videos. I see that he debates people a lot on TikTok Live about, he has a couple videos where it's like, prove to me that God exists, which I think is great. Because I think that, we need more spaces for stuff like this, of just open discourse of opposing ideas. I was listening to one of his past lives about prove to me that God exists, and this is what I saw.
Okay, let's go through the evidence then. What's the argument then?
Well, if you look at history, the Bible is very historically accurate. A lot of people.
What do you mean by historically accurate?
A lot of people that don't believe in God, for example, they believe in evolution. Why do you believe in evolution? Because of faith. You have faith in evolution, not because of science.
No, we have evidence. We have evidence of evolution.
No,
clear
we do
evidence.
not.
Yeah, we do. We have lots of evidence. What are you talking about?
We have evidence of God then.
We have fossil records. We literally have fossil records that you can go and you can look at, that you can engage with, that you can date, that you can do all these different tests to that we've already done. You can't do that same thing for God.
That's not evolution.
What are you talking about? That's not evolution.
Evolution.
We see evolutionary patterns through the fossil record. What are you talking about?
You can see patterns, but that does not mean it's true. Evolution is just a theory. Any real scientist will tell you evolution is a theory.
Theories are proven.
Now, there's a huge stereotype, a prejudice maybe, and there's like a binary of sides when it comes to the whole evolution argument, right? Because when we're talking about the evolution argument, people mostly think that there's only two camps. And that is, one is full-out atheistic Darwinism, old Earth, common ancestor, random mutation plus natural selection explains everything, versus a biblical literalism, young Earth creationism, which is unfortunately what we got in the Ken Ham versus Bill Nye debate, and even pushed this idea that there's only two schools of thought. In The Blind Watchmaker by Dawkins, he acts as if there's only two schools of thought as well. So in evolution, there's several issues, and so I hit each one that are very different from each other. You have ages of the universe and Earth. That's one thing within itself. Is it young? Is it old? How old? Etc. Then you have evolution used in common discussion. There's two ideas, which is common ancestry. So all things come from the first single cell organism that gave rise to all life. That's a second caveat. And then the third mechanism is to explain why that common ancestry expanded into multiple different species. So that is random mutation plus natural selection. And Dr. John Bergsma gave a really nice analogy with all this. He was saying that, like, for example, a litter of puppies, some of them are black, some of them are white. That is random mutation. And then you have natural selection, which operates underneath the random mutation. The example that Dr. Bergsma gives is, let's say there's part of a world where the food that dogs need to eat come out at night. And so the dogs are hunting their prey at night. The black puppies are going to be able to eat better and attack their prey because they're harder to see at night versus the white puppies. After several generations of this, because of the efficiency of the black puppies and the inefficiency of the white puppies die out, and eventually natural selection takes over. Now that part of the world, there's only black dogs. That's another term that you've probably heard of called survival of the fittest. That's very closely related to natural selection. But it's very important to note that just because someone believes in an old Earth, in an old universe that's like billions of years old, they don't necessarily believe in common ancestry. Or maybe they don't necessarily believe in random mutation plus natural selection. Or maybe they believe in one of those things and not the other. There's a broader spectrum than just two main schools of thought. So in Darwin's case, remember, this is what we're talking about, because in the Parker Get a Job live stream, the man was trying to argue that evolution doesn't exist, and Parker was arguing with him that evolution does exist. It turns out that both of them were using the term evolution, but I'm pretty sure that they were both using it in different ways. Because on one hand, the guest, whoever that man was right. Evolution in the macro sense has not been proven actually by science, and we're going to get into that in this video. But Parker was also right that evolution in the sense of microevolution has been proven, and he was using examples such as, like his eye color to show like microevolution and stuff like that, and all these different variables. So that within itself, like the adaptations, as I was talking about, the natural selection, all that stuff, that's an example of microevolution. There's variations of characteristics within a same kind of animal species or genre of animals, such as all hoofed animals or all dogs, etc. Difference is where we say, can the random mutation and natural selection explain the origin of dogs rather than just the difference in characteristics of dogs? Macroevolution, it's the whole story from that single-celled organism to us, and everything in between and those transitions. That's what is called, I believe Dawkins calls it, the insensible fine-graded transitions. He says that the steps from one species to another are so small that they're almost, minuscule, almost insensible. You wouldn't notice them, but they all add up over time is sort of what the argument is. Unfortunately, we don't see these steps in the actual fossil record. So in Darwin's original theory, of this macroevolution, he theorized and predicted that you should be able to see each layer of the fossils. You're going to start with something that's a single-celled organism. Then you're going to get different species of that. And then it's going to even diverse more into different families and different orders. And then you're going to get different body plans, which is a characteristic of what scientists call phyla. And they are clades or groups of organisms that all share the same body plan. We're supposed to see something that's gradual. An example of like different body plans is like arthropods. Those are animals with an exoskeleton, such as insects and some sea life. And so, all animals that are arthropods have the same body plan structure. You learned about this probably in 8th grade biology. Vertebrates, or more so chordates, I believe, animals with a backbone. So we'd be considered part of that categories. And once again, if this were the case, we'd see this in the fossil record of these body plans gradually coming into existence from the single cell. So let's discuss what the fossil record actually shows. So for most of the fossil record, we only have single cell animals for billions of years, according to standard chronology. And then around 600 million BC, we get a blast of the Ediacaran explosion. We get these strange life forms that look like plants. They don't have organs, they don't have limbs, they don't have eyes. It's just a very simple, like pillow-like organism is what they'd be described as. Then around 543 million BC, you get the Cambrian explosion, where suddenly almost all the phyla, remember the body plans, that are still in existence today, so all phyla, they just appear at once without a transition. The transition between the Ediacaran and Cambrian, it's so abrupt. I mean, studies place that the transitional period is only 500,000 years, only 500,000. And you compare that to the 57 million years of the Ediacaran period up until the Cambrian. I mean, 500,000 is not a long enough time period to be able to get from Ediacaran to Cambrian. Even if that was the case, we don't have records of actual transitional fossils within that time frame. I mean, the Cambrian animals are very complex. They're like lobsters. This is some of the first fish appear in this time frame. And most of these creatures, they don't look like things around today, but they are still very complicated. Dawkins even admits in The Blind Watchmaker that he says, and I quote, "It is as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history." And he also says that, creationists are delighted of this. Stephen Meyer's book, which is Darwin's Doubt, points out that, we need transitional fossils, or else this theory, it doesn't work. So here are some theories on why we don't have transitional fossils, and these are also reasons why these theories aren't valid either. The first one, they all eroded away or were destroyed. I'd like to point out first that among most paleontologists today, almost none of them prescribe to that explanation. Little sidetrack, Simon Conway Morris, who's a well-respected biologist and paleontologist. He used to work at Cambridge. He's retired. A huge contributor to understanding the Cambrian period and the fossils. He wrote a very famous paper called Darwin's Dilemma, The Realities of the Cambrian Explosion. I think you can just read that online. And in a Q&A in one of his lectures, he was asked, do you believe that the Cambrian explosion is an artifact of the evolutionary fossil record, as in it only appears to be explosive, that it's just we're missing, fossil records? Or do you believe that it's not an artifact, but it's an actual event? He gave the answer that it's not an artifact, that he believes it is a real event, which already contradicts Darwin, who was claiming that these transitional fossils eroded away or were destroyed. He already has claimed it's a real event. And when asked for the explanation, he hypothesizes it's a mixture of an increase in oxygen levels and the Ediacaran animals, which is not much of an explanation, because a lot of people believe today that the Ediacaran animals, they're not even related to the Cambrian. They just went extinct after the Cambrian came about, and that most people believe that the evolutionary trajectory that led to the Cambrian, that it most likely went around the Ediacaran, and they weren't even part of that. And then recent research has also proved that there wasn't actually a rise of oxygen levels, and even if there were, scientists have done experiments of placing animals in high oxygenated environments, and you would expect an increase or a jump of some kind of information in the DNA, which you get none of that. At best, rise in oxygen levels, they might be a necessary precursor of life, but even so, that doesn't explain the biological information that suddenly has to appear, which, as I just said, doesn't happen. American biologist Jerry Coyne wrote a book called Why Evolution is True, and he has a chapter on the fossil record, and in about a page and a half in the book, he recounts the history of life, but he omits the Cambrian explosion. However, even in the text, in the body, he doesn't mention it, but he does have a graph on one of the pages, and it does say Cambrian explosion. You just look at a lot of these biologists, these atheist biologists, and a lot of them either completely avoid the problem of the Cambrian explosion completely, or they don't really have a good explanation. As I said, we're going to keep going through some of the faulty explanations. So one of Dawkins' explanations is that all the fossils washed away and were eroded. The problem is that we do have rock layers, sedimentary rock layers that precede the Cambrian, where we do find these Ediacaran fossils. And these biota, which are contrasted to the Cambrian, they're not transitional at all. Gunter Beckley, who is a professional paleontologist, he points out that it's also not just the Cambrian explosion, but this is a pattern that occurs throughout the entire fossil record. I mean, you look at the angiosperms, which are the flowering plant explosion, because flowering plants, that's a kind of plant life. They have no precursors. The avian explosion, the bird explosion, you get many different types of birds there. And there's several other explosions as well. He has a chapter written in the book God's Grandeur, The Case for Intelligent Design, where he talks about every single explosion and their fossil record, and he has plenty of lectures on YouTube and online, and you can go check those out. And British scientist Fred Hoyle also agreed that in order for life to have happened, spontaneously forming on Earth, the odds of that is mathematically 1 to the 10 to the 4,000th odd. Like, that's an insane odd that is just too unlikely. But Fred Hoyle, seeing that it couldn't have spontaneously formed, he didn't appeal to the God argument or the divine creator, the ultimate reality argument. He appealed to a different argument that's not Darwinian. It's called directed panspermia, which is where aliens would have come from somewhere, seeded life on Earth. But then, you then have to explain, well, where did the aliens come from? Who created them? You might be explaining how life started on Earth, but you're not explaining how alien life started. Another thing Dawkins brings up is that, okay, maybe the fossil record wasn't eroded, but maybe the animals were just all soft-bodied, and so we can't get their fossils in that transitional period. Well, the problem is that a lot of Ediacaran biota, these organisms that do show up in the fossil record, in the sedimentary layers in pre-Cambrian history, many of those are soft-bodied, and we have fossilized sponge embryos, which are very delicate, and we have those fossilized as well in those same layers too, and none of those are transitional fossils. So not only do we have earlier fossils than the Cambrian, and not only do we have fossils in the Ediacaran period, but not only do we have fossils that appear to be soft-bodied and etc. that could be very delicate, and not only do none of them transition into the Cambrian, we have a series of arguments here that would then contradict this macroevolutionary mindset. Now, Parker mentions an interesting point in the video. He talks about the mutations, I believe he talks about in fruit flies, which he's referring to a study done influencing mutating the Hox gene in fruit flies. That's what he's specifically talking about. These mutations will change the body of an animal very quickly in dramatic ways. That could explain a faster transitional period than what scientists would expect or what the animals would need to have.
Be true, yes, evolution is proven.
Okay, go repeat evolution for me right now.
What are you talking about? We observe it in nature, right? We observe it not only in nature, but we observed it in the lab. We've seen speciation. We've seen mutations, adaptations, right? Currently, right now, my eye colors is technically a mutation, right?
That's still not something that you can repeat and observe.
It literally is. It literally is, right? I have stuff listed in my Discord. I can show you stuff, right? Clearly of them actually doing this within labs, with doing experiments, right? Stuff like that, especially for these particular types of things.
What Parker doesn't mention in his TikTok live is that all of these mutations are lethal to the animal, at least most of them. So in the Hox genes, these studies, you see that, sometimes they'll have legs coming out of their head, or their body parts will be out of order. And so what that does is, as I said, almost all, because they either are born dead, if in that mutation process in those studies, they're either born dead, and for the few that do survive, where it's not lethal, they can't reproduce. So there's no point in this dramatic mutation, because if you can't reproduce from that point, then then the dramatic mutation doesn't matter, because then it stops there. There's no continuation to the next dramatic mutation. Dawkins even mentions that fast evolution doesn't work. You can't make a big biological jump, because if you do that, let's say you're a fish and you're trying to become a lizard, there's an infinitesimal amount of scenarios where you die rather than you live. Dawkins says it has to be gradual, it has to be small. So you can't use those Hox gene, fruit fly experiments, because they don't, even if it was a possibility for genetic mutation to just jump and for you to quicken the transitional process, those studies still prove that they are lethal and that they are non-reproductory. Scientists who also respond to the book Darwin's Doubt, they say it's the reorganization of gene regulatory networks, or maybe, they also bring up the mutations of the Hox genes. But when we try these things experimentally, once again, they always end up with a dead animal. And animals aren't born with variation in their body plan. Like, they have one phyla. Like, they don't have variations in their body plan. A vertebrate is going to have a vertebrate body plan and nothing else. Because in cases where they do, once again, it's lethal, it kills them. Dogs have a dog body plan. Natural selection has literally nothing to work with when it comes to trying to create new species. Natural selection has a lot to work with within the species of the genre of animals, so such as for, like dogs being black or white, but they can't create a new species from a pre-existing species, because, you don't have puppies today that have a body plan similar to an arthropod or a chiroderm, like none of those variations exist. You only have dogs with dog body plans. You only have humans with human body plans. And once again, if there was a variation, they die, and it'd be lethal, and you wouldn't even be able to get past step one. And you need more than just step one to get to a new species. You need thousands of steps, according to evolutionists. Now, there are one or two Ediacaran organisms that some scientists have pressed as transitional fossils for the Cambrian. And I'll respond to this. One, that's heavily debated, and there are plenty of scientists that say they're not transitional. And let's just say that they are. Let's just say these one or two Ediacaran organisms are transitional. It doesn't matter, because you don't need one or two. You need thousands upon thousands for this theory to be true. And they have to be in a sequence. We have so many fossils, to work with. And if the fact of the matter is you are trying to make these 1 or 2 fossils fit into this huge schema, but you need thousands, and you're expecting thousands if this theory does exist, and you don't have those, you're really just grasping for straws at that point. Another non-Darwinian argument is that, like, well, these genes that we use for the proteins in our bodies, they're single-celled organisms, they're found there. That makes sense because our bodies are made up of cells, but this argumentation doesn't work, though, because it doesn't make it easy for a single-celled organism to move and become a Cambrian animal just because we have similar genetic codes in our proteins from our bodies to single-celled organisms that we see today. This path requires a lot of biological data, and then like how long do you have to wait around for a beneficial mutation to happen? So you aren't going to get enough mutation with the extremely short, remember, transitional period of 500,000 years. There's only 500,000 years between the Ediacaran and the Cambrian explosion period, that transitional period. You just don't have enough time, even if that's the case. And for those of you who are scholars and want to run down every single alternate possible explanation, I've tried to give as many as I could here to support Darwinian macroevolution. They are all responded to very well, might I add, and also in layman's terms in the book Darwin's Doubt. As I said before, literally he addresses all of them. It's a phenomenal book. So if you happen to have an argument that I didn't posit, that I didn't get to today, that you think supports Darwinian macroevolution, please go read that book. And even the arguments I did talk about today, that book way better explains it than what I did in this video. So this is why I finally say, Parker, 1, the fossil record does not support macroevolution. The fossil record, if anything, supports that macroevolution is not a thing. It's not proven. The evidence that we thought was going to be provable of it using the fossil record, as I just showed in this video, the fossil records do not at this moment, at this time, prove in macroevolution, so you can't use the fossil record as evidence. And in reality, it actually proves, I believe, more the fossil record that macroevolution did not exist. So if you were to say that the fossil record is proven anything, it's proven against macroevolution. You can come to the agreement that microevolution does exist, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that, including the guest that you had on. And unfortunately, the guest that you had on, I don't think was articulating his point extremely well, but I hope this video helps. I hope this video has provided you a different perspective into what evolution is actually posited on the scientific community, what is talked about around it, and I hope this video was educational in the, I guess more so, the argument against the idea of Darwinian evolution. And if you have a response video, if you wanna, if you think there is evidence that supports macroevolution besides the fossil record, or maybe you think the fossil record does, and that I've made a mistake in my research, then I 100% would welcome a response video. But thank you so much. Hopefully you see this and watch this whole thing through. And to anyone else who's watching this, thank you for joining on Now What. And I have a couple other videos on my TikTok page, on my YouTube page, on whatever platform you're watching this, on why God or why a divine creator is necessary, and we prove this through Big Bang cosmology, the fine-tuning argument, and the origins of life. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a blessed day.